Happy New Year. Hope you had a great holidays. Please like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. And today we are interviewing Local 4 alumni Mort Crim. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Max. I'm off to a pretty good start to the new year.
That's great. Nice office.
Thank you. Yeah, I spend a lot of time here and do a lot of recording and interviewing, such as I'm doing with you today, and other kinds of work.
You're welcome. Did you have a favorite part about the Bernie Chuck Mort Carmen reunion?
I think the favorite part was just getting together with old friends. I have kept in touch somewhat with Carmen and with Chuck, but I've not spent very much time back in Detroit since I retired. So it's been mostly telephone contacts. Chuck did come through here with his wife, Susan, and we got together for lunch 2 or 3 years ago. But to sit down with all four of us together and be able to reminisce over old times and catch up on what's happening in our respective lives, that was the best part of it for me.
I'm sure everyone else enjoyed the get together as well.
I think they did. Yes, they seem to.
It was very fun to watch. What days specifically and time duration did it take to film the reunion?
You know, we all have pretty busy schedules. Believe it or not, even in retirement, I seem to be busier than I was when I was actively working. Have so many activities going. But it took us one day. We were all able to commit to a single day. And the way they did it, they set each one of us down individually for 1 hour of just answering questions like I'm doing with you today about our lives and what we've been doing since retirement and since leaving the team. And after that hour was over for each of us, then they set the four of us down on that circular couch that you saw, where we're kind of facing each other. And they had us just talk without any interviewer, just talk among ourselves. I was wondering, how long we could last at that. But I'll tell you what, when the hour was up, we weren't ready to quit. I mean, we had so much to talk about, so much catching up to do, we just kept going. To commemorate the 75th anniversary of the TV station.
Uh, was there a teleprompter at when you were doing the reunion?
No, no, nothing was scripted. All of that was just us talking to each other and talking to the interviewer, Eli Zaret, who used to be a sportscaster on Channel 4 back in the day, and then went on to do network and had some other interesting challenges. Well, he's back at DIV now, and they put him in charge of this project as the line producer, and he did, I thought, an excellent job. And he did the interviewing of each one of us individually. But when it came to the four of us on the couch, there was no interview, there was no questions, there was no teleprompter or any of that.
When did you film it before it aired on TV?
I was up there in early September, and I believe it aired in mid to late November, didn't it? Sometime around Thanksgiving time. Uh, Probably 4 to 6 weeks between the time because it took them a lot of time to go through all the material. I mean, you think about 1 hour with each of us, and then another hour with the four of us together, plus all the other things they had to crowd into that documentary about the 75th anniversary. So it was a gargantuan job. I don't envy Eli and the staff that Ro Capola was another key figure in putting this all together. And Ro and Eli had their hands full in trying to sort through this and decide what should be used and what could be dropped.
Did you write your own stuff for the newscast?
In the news business, most of us, either as anchors or reporters, and most anchors are also reporters. I went out and did a fair share of reporting while I was anchoring. Uh, we are, because we're journalists and because we're reporters, we write a lot of our own material. We had writers in the newsroom who did nothing but write, but I would always write my lead story and I would always write my closing kicker and usually would write one or two things in between for a newscast, wrote all of my commentaries. And then after writing that, it would be put on the teleprompter but it would be our own words or those of one of the staff writers coming back at us on the teleprompter when we went in to do a newscast.
So they were electronic and not like poster board type
Well,
when you first started.
when I first started in the business, Max, we're talking about 1957. And in 1957, the teleprompter, they had teleprompter. We had moved past the poster board, although way, way back, that is what they did. They were called cue cards, and they would write in large black letters. By the time I got into the business in 57, they had teleprompters, but they were just paper scrolls. And they had a typewriter that would type huge print. And they would type on these scrolls, or they could handwrite on them. And then somebody actually stood in the scroll was above the lens of the camera. Now, the new teleprompters, the electronic that we used, actually, the lens shot right through the teleprompter. So when I was talking to the audience, I was looking right at the audience. I was looking right at the lens. But in the earlier days, when we had these scrolls, these paper scrolls, and somebody was there with a handle, and they were just rolling it at whatever our reading rate was. And because we had to look just above the lens of the camera to read the script, if the camera got too close to you, it was very obvious to the audience that you weren't looking at them. You were looking off camera. So, and the problem was if they got too far back, some of us had, were nearsighted a little bit. And if they got too far back, I couldn't read the prompter. So it was kind of a balancing act. But that all got resolved when somebody invented the electronic prompter that was actually reflected on a piece of glass through which the lens of the camera you could look right into the lens and at the prompter at the same time. And that really solved a lot of issues.
Different models of teleprompters.
Early day cue cards to second generation would have been the rolled scripts. The third generation would have been the rolled scripts with a picture taken of them and put on a little TV monitor. And then the last generation, which is the one currently in use and the one that I used for most of my career, was write it into a computer. It goes directly to a TV monitor and right through the lens and right to the anchor.
Did you ever have anxiety while or before you were anchoring or reporting?
You know, I'm often asked, are you nervous when you get up to make a speech, a public speech, or go on television? And my answer is quite simple. I have been nervous and anxious on those few occasions when I was not prepared. I think the real antidote to anxiety for any kind of public life, if you're speaking at a podium as a public speaker to a live audience, if you're on a stage as a performer, if you're in a television studio looking at a camera, the best antidote for anxiety and nervousness is to be prepared and know what you're doing. And I can tell you there have been a few times in my career, early on especially, when I didn't take that seriously. And I kind of went off, I can think a couple of speeches that I made where I was kind of half cocked and thought, I can do this. And as I got closer to time to be introduced and to get up and talk, I got more and more anxious and more nervous and wondering, am I in over my head? But if you thoroughly prepare, if you've written your newscast, you've studied the script, you know what's coming, you know what you're going to do, you know what you're going to say, you've checked the pronunciations, you know you're not going to stumble over some foreign name or some difficult world capital someplace that's hard to pronounce. If you have done your homework, then there really is no reason to be anxious or to be nervous. And I think that's true throughout life in pretty much anything.
When you started your news career, did they have you guys wear makeup because the lighting was intense, or did that start later on?
Well, I think makeup has been a part of show business, of performing, whether you're on Broadway or whether you're on television, whether you're an entertainer or whether you're a newscaster. You want to look your best. That's why we wear suits and ties and make sure our hair is combed. And part of looking your best on television, because these cameras are extremely sensitive in showing every flaw. And I don't think you want, I'll take you back to the Nixon-Kennedy debate, which you weren't even born when that occurred, but there is widespread belief among analysts and historians that it was Nixon's, this was the early days of television, it was still black and white. Kennedy wore makeup, Nixon did not. And Nixon had a heavy 5 o'clock shadow, a beard. And he looked kind of like a gangster, frankly. Uh, he didn't look pleasant. He didn't look trustworthy. And a lot of it had to do with that failure of his to wear makeup. So I guess, you know, when we're doing a newscast, we don't want people to be distracted by thinking, oh, gee, he's got a zit right there, you know. So we put makeup on to look our best, the same reason we put on a shirt and a tie. Because the lights and the cameras can be excruciatingly honest.
Yes, I have my little ring light and I'm always like readjusting it so that the light hits where it's not like glowing and
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. But when the sun's down, it gets really hard because there's not that natural light coming in.
Yes,
To
right.
It works really well when you have the sun's force and the ring light because then they can work together. But
Yeah,
when
you
you,
can set up a little backlight if you want to, and yeah.
yep. What is the easiest thing for you to anchor or report on?
I don't know that I've ever been asked that question before, so I'll give you extra points for that. I don't think my job was hard. I worked with a very professional team, and they made it easy. The people in the studio were professional, the camera people, the lighting people, the sound technicians, the directors, the producers. They were all first rate. They were all professionals, and because we all worked that way as a team, it was a demanding job. I don't mean to underplay that. It was a job that required you to be on your toes, but it wasn't a hard job in the sense of, oh, gee, we're having to grind this out every day. No, it ran like a well-oiled machine and was a smooth operation. I think the most challenging, and maybe that's the word I'm looking for rather than hard, the most challenging was covering a disaster live. And now I was already retired. No, I wasn't retired at 9/11. I was still working at Channel 4. But I was not in New York, so I was covering it from the relative safety of an anchor desk, you know, 1,000 miles away. But the people who were there, and I've had to cover disasters, airplane crashes, burning buildings where people were trapped inside, the aftermath of hurricanes and tornadoes and floods. Those are hard because there's so much human drama involved, and because you're dealing with sadness and with loss and with the grief. It was not a hard job. It was a demanding job. Often there were long hours involved, but I enjoyed every year that I spent in television and in radio. I enjoyed.
So, what was your favorite topic to anchor or report on?
You know, I was very fortunate to have some really interesting news assignments, and the most exciting was when I covered the manned space program, because we were just in the early days. I was down at Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, which later was renamed the Space Center, Kennedy Space Center. I was sent down there to cover every manned launch from Gemini 3 through Apollo 12. And that means I was there for the first moon landing, and met a lot of the astronauts. In fact, just a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of interviewing for another podcast, and I was the interviewer in that one, Jim Lovell, who was the commander of Apollo 13. If you've seen the movie Apollo 13 about the explosion on the way to the moon, and they almost died. And thanks to the bravery and the skill of those astronauts and the ground crew in Houston, who were monitoring and directing a lot of it, they survived. But it was a real close call. But it was fun watching the rockets go off, covering the trips to the moon, the circumnavigation around the moon, the landings on the moon. And then, of course, the return and the splashdown was always an exciting event. That was probably stands out in my memory as the most exciting news assignment that I ever had.
That's interesting. It sounds very interesting. I'll have to watch it. I just
If you get a chance to watch Apollo 13, it's one of those movies that is very, very close to the facts. It's a drama, and it's fiction, and Tom Hanks plays the part of Jim Lovell. But it's as somebody who covered the space program as a journalist and then watched that movie as entertainment, I can tell you. And Jim Lovell himself said it was very, very accurate and very close to the. So if you watch Apollo 13, you'll have a good insight into what really happened.
all right. What is it currently streaming on?
That I can't tell you, but I'd start with Netflix.
Okay.
Other that, or just ask Google, where can I find Apollo 13?
Yep. So what was your least favorite topic to anchor a report on?
Well, I hated to have to report on anything that brought out the worst in human nature, terrible crimes where somebody had, or maybe more than one, had been brutally, viciously murdered, uh, skyjackings, the abduction of children. That was just an awful, awful thing to have to cover when a child was missing, and very often those did not have good endings. So yes, the human tragedies would rank up to me as the hardest things to cover and the least desirable. But they had to be covered.
It's so sad how much violence and all that's happening right now.
It's always been there, but I do think that the 24-hour, 24-hour days a day, 7 days a week coverage with so many different news outlets plus all the internet coverage. It's in our face all the time, and I do believe it's up to us as consumers of information to select what we're going to watch and not. We shouldn't just be saturating ourselves with all this gloom and doom because it's always been out there, but it's not healthy for us as individuals or as a society if we focus on that, and we can lose sight of how much goodness there is in the world and how many good people there are in the world and how many. We look at the young people who do horrible things like that kid who's accused of murdering those 4 college students. But if we look around, there are thousands more young people like you who are picking up a challenge and saying, "Hey, I want to do radio, television, journalism, broadcasting, whatever. I don't know what your specific goals are, but you are more representative of the young people of America today than that pathetic young man who may have killed those 4 people. We won't know that, of course, until he's tried and if he's convicted. But I just think it is incumbent upon all of us as consumers of information these days to get some perspective. And one way we get perspective is to take our eyes off the tube and look around at real life, look at our neighbors, look at our friends, look at the kids we know who are in high school and in college and say, yeah, that's real life. That's where most of it is, not what television focuses on, which is the bizarre and the ugly all too often.
They're either your words or Steve Gargiola's at his retirement. Channel 4 is the most trusted in Detroit for news. Words, but they also kind of tie into what you were saying of like Channel 4 out of every news outlet in Detroit. If I'm watching it, it's got to be 4 because it's least biased. There's nothing really too much of outside factors.
Well, I appreciate that because I do think that the station, when I was there, was very committed to honest journalism, and I think they still are. I know Devin Skillion. I know the people who are still there, plowing the fields of journalism, and they are first rate. They are honest. They are professional, and I appreciate hearing you say that about my old alma mater.
I watch when I have time to, and I'm not in the middle of something. And I mean, it's nice to know what's going on in the world and not hear of like biased opinions where it's just fact.
Can I put in one plug for my book?
Yes.
You're probably aware that I wrote my memoir. It was the eighth book that has been published of mine, and probably my last one, but it has a lot of the history of Channel 4, of my time at Channel 4 with Carmen and Chuck, and also my network, my years at the network covering space and presidents and a lot of other stuff. But the book is called Anchored, A Journalist's Search for Truth, and it's available at mortcrimspeaks.com. That's MORTCRIM speaks.com. And if you order it there, you can get it from Amazon. You could get Anchored from any bookstore. But if you get it at my website, you'll get an autographed copy. So I would be happy to share that book. And I think my life story has been pretty interesting. And at least a publisher thought it was interesting enough to put it out there. So Max, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. You do a really good job. I know that because I watched some of your earlier podcasts when you gave me the link to them, and I appreciated it. And it's been an honor to be on this show with you.
Thank you. And here is a question from Miss Antoinette Morton, one of the WBMS office secretaries. In the movie Anchorman, the main news anchorman Ron Burgundy was the character based on you. You can find the answer in the book Anchorman. And I will definitely put the link to your website down. What are some of the other books you've written, or just a brief description about some of them?
Some of them are out of print because they were written so many years ago, but The Joy of Good News is still available. Good News for a Change is still available. The one book I wrote that became a bestseller was How to Be as Terrific as Your Dog Thinks You Are. The print version is no longer available, but we have the audio version as a talking book. It comes in a 4 CD set. How to Be as Terrific as Your Dog Thinks You Are. That is a good book. And a lot of businesses have bought that and given it to their employees because it's really life lessons we learn from our pets.
When did you start working for Local 4?
1978, August.
And when did you end up retiring?
1998. I was there 20 years. Actually, had a presence on the station beyond that because I had a series of commentaries called Second Thoughts. And the station continued to run those for some time after I was no longer there.
And who was your favorite person to work with on air?
That is a loaded question that I won't answer.
Okay.
Because I enjoyed working with all of them. I was very close to Carmen, obviously, because we were co-anchors and we probably spent more time together on the set. We were there, every minute of every show. Whereas the weatherman Chuck was in and then he was out, and Bernie was in for sports and he was out. But your co-anchors really worked together more cohesively and for more hours as a team. There's an old joke about about the co-anchor being my work wife, and me being her work husband. And there's some truth to that because we do spend probably as much time with our co-anchors in the newsroom and on the air as we do with our families at home.
Didn't someone say that in like the reunion film?
They may have. It's commonly referred to that way. So yeah, very likely.
What is your news reporting history and roles?
What jobs did I have growing up into the industry? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, or like right when you got out of college and you did news stuff, like what were your roles and at what station?
Well, I got my first job in radio when I was 16 years old, and I was between high school and college. I graduated early. I turned 17 that summer while I was on the job. But I got a disc jockey job, announcing and disc jockey in Blytheville, Arkansas, at a little station, KLCN. those kinds of jobs are not readily available anymore. They were hard to get then, and I banged on the door of probably 10, 15 radio stations before I finally found one that would hire me, because I didn't have any experience. All I had was a lot of ambition. And then I went to college after that following fall. And I worked because I had gained 3 months of experience. Then I was able to go to a station in where the college was located in Indiana and get a part-time job at another radio station. And then I went into the Air Force, had 1 year, less than a year in television before I had to go into the military. And I worked part-time in civilian broadcasting for radio stations the whole time I was in the military. And I produced radio and television programs for the Air Force. So by the time I got out, by then I'd completed college and I had my Air Force military commitment done. And I went to graduate school at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, Northwestern University, and got a master's degree in journalism. And from there, I went to New York and I worked for a New York radio station for a year. And then I was picked up by ABC and I worked for the network as a network broadcaster and correspondent. And then I decided to get into the local television anchoring business. And I started that career in Louisville, Kentucky, went from there to Philadelphia, and a 5-year run there. And then I went to Chicago. That job in Chicago didn't work out because I was hired to replace a man whose New York deal fell through and he didn't leave. So they ended up with, think of the Lions as having 2 first-string quarterbacks. Neither one of them is going to want to sit on the bench. Well, neither Bill nor I wanted to, be the second string. So from there, I went to Detroit, had a great run there for 20 years. And that was really the bulk of my career.
What was the thought that made you want to retire?
Oh, and by the way, all of these things you're asking me about are dealt with extensively in the book Anchored. Well, I retired at 65. I'd been on the air. I'd been in the business for 45 years. I started young. And I was just ready for something different. And I didn't really retire. I just simply left television. I'd started a production company, and my wife and we continued. I was doing my syndicated radio. We were on about 1,300 radio stations. We had national sponsorship. And I continued that until I was 75 for another 10 years. And then I continued to do public speaking and to write books. And so it wasn't as though I retired at 65. I simply felt I needed to shift gears and do some new things and some other things, and also have more freedom and more time, which having 2 television shows every night where you had to be there and at the same place and the same time didn't give you a lot of freedom. What I was doing with radio, I could record a week's worth of programming in a day, and then I had 4 days, relatively free to do work other things into my schedule.
What are you currently working on?
I am currently spending a lot of time producing home videos for my family. I discovered we had hundreds of hours of old movie film, 8mm film, and a lot of people will have that in their homes. Old VHS tapes for which there are no longer any VHS machines. Everything now is either downloaded on a thumb drive or on a DVD. So I equipped my office here with some of the old equipment. I have reel-to-reel tape recorders, audio recorders. I have a VHS machine. I have a cassette machine, so that I can digitalize all of this old material. And then for birthdays, for Christmas, for special events, special things in our family, I put together a little mini documentary of the family. Like for my daughter, my sister just turned 80, and I have film of her going back to when she was 3 years old. So you're talking film, 77-year-old film. It's black and white. It's kind of grainy, but I digitalized it. I was able to improve it electronically in the editing process. And I put together for her a 20-minute reel with narration, with music, with special effects. And it was very professional, but it was just for the family. It was for her two children, for my children, for friends of hers who know and love her. And so that's how I'm spending a lot of my time these days. I've kind of moved from looking out on the world to looking in on my own world and my own family and trying to leave what I call legacy videos for them.
All right. What is your education?
Ongoing. I accumulated credits from a number of undergraduate schools before I finally was able to put it all together and get a 4-year degree at the University of Nebraska. They have since given me an honorary doctorate, which I'm very proud of. And then after that, I went to Northwestern and did 2 years of graduate work to get a master's degree in journalism. But education, not just for the journalist, but for anybody who is thinking, should be ongoing. And I've heard professors say that, you know, what college does is it teaches you how to learn. And I really believe that. You could spend 6, 8, 10, 20 years in a university setting, and you're not going to learn everything. But if you have, in addition to what accumulated knowledge you pick up in school, the main thing you want to pick up is to increase your thirst for knowledge and improve your ability to seek and absorb and use knowledge. That, to me, is the primary role of higher education, or any education, high school too, for that matter. So to me, it's, you know, reading books and magazines and newspapers and watching television to gain information. And there's some really good stuff out there on the History Channel, on the actually PBS has some great stuff. The BBC has some good stuff. If you search around, there is an awful lot to be found on television, even though it gets, you know, poo-pooed by a lot of people as not being very intellectual. But there's information out there on the internet, and I find it's exciting to just consider myself a sponge and always looking for new insights, new revelations, new understanding in science, in technology, in history, in political science, in just what all is going on in the world around us.
All righty. Well, I would like to thank you for joining. I had a great time talking. All your website, I will link all of that to the description after I do some editing.
I thank you, and it's
You're
been a real
welcome.
pleasure. And as I say, I was impressed by you and by what you're doing from having watched some of your other work. So it's an honor to be interviewed by you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening. I will send this over to you soon.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All
Happy New
righty.
Year
Have
to
a
you.
great evening. Happy New Year.